Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond Backlog. My name is Suraj Joel, and today we are tackling a topic that's often misunderstood: API product management. Whether you're a product manager who is working with APIs or just curious to know what it entails, this episode we plan to break down the myths, best practices, and how APIs impact user experience and business strategy. To help us navigate this, today we have Fakkir Mohamed, who has over 15 years of experience in IT industry. He's been working across multiple domains. He started in the startup world, developing web and digital products before moving into the financial sector with BNY Mellon, where he focused on wealth and asset management products. He's had a major role in shaping the future of API based products at TransUnion. Fakir, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Suraj. Really appreciate the fact that you guys are having me here. I've been following your work, your posts on LinkedIn, the Product
Oh,
Bros, and also the Beyond Backlog podcasts. So this is really helpful for anybody who is looking for product management related content or anybody who is interested in moving into product management. This is fantastic work. I did also watch your previous episode, the podcast with Prem on leadership from a product management perspective. So
okay.
fantastic insights and great to be here.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Fakir, for those kind words. And I'm really pleased to hear that you watched our first episode. This is our second episode. I hope you come back again and again in this episode. All right,
Totally.
cool. All right, cool. So let's start with the big myth. Many people assume that API product management is purely technical. What's your take on that?
Well, that is a myth, right? So again, that's a common misconception that people have. So to maybe just to take a step back, right? API products are very similar to any other products that we build in the market. So the core product management principles are exactly the same, both for for API products as well as for UX oriented,
Hmm.
front end oriented products as well. You definitely have to focus on your customer pain points. You will have
Yeah.
to align your product with your company strategy, right? And you're going to have to define metrics for your product. So all these are exactly the same. The only difference though is in terms of how your consumers interact with your product, right? And more often than not, you will have another system consuming your application instead of a consumer. So that definitely is slightly different in terms of user experience. But in short, think like this is not I would say this is not, you cannot classify this as technical work for sure,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
as I summed up for now, right, all the product management principles are in play here. And just to add, maybe there is some element of difference in terms of how we test these products, or how we can visualize these products. And that has probably led to this misconception of people believing that API products are generally technical.
Great, great. Yes, actually, that is where I was also going to. Since you don't really have that visual connect, how do I become a product manager for something which is actually going on beyond behind the scenes, right? So that was what I was also curious to know about. Okay, so would you say an API product manager needs to write codes?
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not. An API product manager is definitely, so the three amigos come into the picture, right? You have your Scrum Master, or
Hmm.
the like in safe world RTs and Scrum Masters. You have your Scrum teams. You have your delivery teams as well. So as a product manager, you're expected to coordinate with these stakeholders. I'm sorry. So it's like Scrum Masters, your teams, and your architects, and you are the fourth like stakeholder here. So you generally be expected to coordinate amongst these stakeholders to get things delivered. Maybe I think one common factor that leads people to think about it this way is the way we invoke the APIs. So
Hmm.
we from a UX UI perspective, we directly go around and play around with the screens to get an understanding of how the functionalities are working and all of that, right? So maybe the only difference here is probably you'll have to use tools like Swagger or Postman to execute your API. So that's maybe the way you execute these, the way you write these commands are similar to maybe writing DB scripts or something like DB queries or something like that. Maybe that
Hmm.
has probably led to this misconception that like product managers on the API world will probably have to write code. No, but that's definitely not the case. You're
Yeah.
definitely going to rely on your tech stakeholders who are actually experts on writing code to write code, and you
Mm.
as a product manager is definitely going to be focused on the overall strategy and making sure whatever your the reason objectives for building the API are actually met.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it. That's super interesting. So if someone is a product manager today and wants to transition into, let's say, API product management, what's the best way to start?
I would say, let me take a step back again, right? So, from an API standpoint, API is just another software application that we build that is
Mm.
hosted on a server or on cloud, and you have an URL to invoke. So there are methods or different ways of executing the APIs. Like there are different methods, different operations that you can perform with the APIs. So maybe to start with, I would suggest getting a basic understanding of these API operations, the standard methods would be a good place to start for anybody. It's not just for product managers, even for anybody for that matter, to get an
Mm.
understanding of APIs. So there are tons of content in LinkedIn, YouTube, and like the other learning like materials like Udemy and other learning platforms today. So
Yeah.
to get started with, I think you could start with API basics, understand how like what are the operations that are possible with an API today, and probably from there on, maybe another way to get a good understanding of how APIs work is there are a lot of public APIs that are available today that are free to consume as well. So getting your hands dirty, working with those APIs, trying some requests and understanding. I mean, like reviewing the responses. That will
Mm.
probably be another good way to get a practical understanding of how APIs work. So with these, I think you'd get an understanding of what happens in the world of API and how is it different from the UI UX oriented applications. And from that standpoint, that would really be helpful for anybody to get started on the API world as a product
Mm.
manager.
Got it. Got it.
And
Okay.
maybe
Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
I'll
Go
probably
ahead.
add a few more. No, yeah, I'll just add a few more examples here. I think when I mentioned some open source or free APIs available, right? Just take
Yeah.
an example of a weather API or a Bloomberg ticker, for instance.
Mm.
So these are some practical APIs that you can, that are readily available. You could go in and like give in your like key in or execute with your inputs and receive the required outputs. So in generally, we would integrate these Bloomberg tickers and others in our websites, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the API URLs will also be available. We could play around with that. Google Maps is another fantastic example. The Google
Mm.
Maps provides APIs, and
Yeah.
now I think with the Gen AI tools, even they are coming up with API. I mean, you have
Mm.
like even Chat GPTs and the
Yeah.
the co-pilots of the world. They also have their API versions available for consumers to directly interact and check them out. So maybe these are some good APIs for someone to give it a shot to get their hands dirty and understand APIs.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Cool. 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 Just following up on my previous question. So we talked about API not being in the glamorous world of product management as such because you're not front facing. There's another myth that user experience in APIs is just straightforward, right? Or it's not as critical as UI based products. I'm sure you're going to come back very hard on that, but I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, you kind of you nailed it, Suraj. So, user experience is the key, right, for your applications to be. I mean, for in the first place, for your consumers to pay for your product, it has to meet their specific needs, right?
Yeah.
So, and if let's say your product is not aligned or streamlined to do that in a very efficient manner, your
Mm.
customers are not going to be ready to pay for your product, and
Yeah.
that kind of uh, so the success of product definitely depends on your customers being ready to pay for your product, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I'll maybe uh, take this route to explain this path, right? So when we say I started off saying APIs are products, or rather APIs are cases where you have systems invoking your APIs, right? So
Mm.
your
Mm.
customers are directly not your end consumers who are the actual beneficiaries.
Yeah.
Your APIs are generally consumed by another application, which in turn would be used by end users.
Yeah.
Just to give you a simple example, I can talk about my own firm's scenarios, right? Let's say um, with TransUnion, let's say, like any bank today uses in India, for instance, CIBIL score for their like for for risk management, risk assessment, and all of that, right? Credit risk
Right.
assessment to start with. So let's say if Suraj, if you walk into a bank today to apply for a credit card or for loan, your bank executives are going to get your identifiers like your name, your date of birth, your Aadhaar number in India, or maybe PAN number and your address and things like that. And the next step they're going to do is they're going to invoke an API from TransUnion perspective, providing this information, and then in return they would probably get the credit scores and attributes, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about this, um, let's say if a scenario where you are sitting besides your bank executive, right, you'd be able to provide any information that they ask for. Whereas let's say if you're doing it in a remote mode, like getting an additional, let's say you provided all of the required information, and then maybe there are additional information that is required to determine your credit score or whatever it is, right? So these kind of situations can be handled better from a UI perspective, because you know, like prompting, asking for new or having some parts of your UI refresh is comparatively easier than an API. So from a user experience standpoint, when I build and define an API, I would have to be completely aware of who's using my application. Like, let's say the bank executive who's going to use my application is not my direct consumer, but I would also have to understand how the product that's consuming my API serves the bank executive, and in turn, who's going to work with you as a consumer in front, in like who sits in front of him, right?
Yeah.
So the user experience aspect of APIs is not as straightforward as it is with a UI or UX based like a front end based application. So I would say the complexity definitely is in terms of understanding who's going to consume and what are they going to do with your application. The
Mm.
second thing is making sure, let's say, streamlining the process, making sure you provide all the required information at one shot is the key here. And you cannot prompt for multiple information like again and again, like we did for the other products, right? Like this, just to talk about the UI products and all of that. So all of that makes it a bit more complicated, but at the same time, yes, you are definitely not going to worry about the look and feel, the glamorous aspects of the UI or things like that, right? So yes, so the answer to your question is the user experience in the API world has its own complexities and own challenges. It is not as straightforward as how it is with the UI UX on a front end based application. Maybe that's how I'd
Yeah.
put it.
Got it. Okay, cool. So you spoke a lot about the challenges. I mean, in your answer, you mentioned that there's a lot of things which you have to keep in mind as to who is the user going to be and how is he going to consume the data, right? So speaking of that, how do you design a great user experience from an API perspective?
All right. So I'd probably answer this question by maybe touching upon some of the important parameters to consider when you're
Mm.
defining user experience from an API standpoint, right?
Okay.
So, as with any product, you're definitely going to have to do an extensive study of your customers. We just talked about that in detail, right? So, you're going to
Yeah.
think about who your customers are. Let's say with the APIs, there's an additional layer of complexity wherein your API kind of decouples your front end applications, right? So,
Mm.
which means it enables multiple front end applications to be built, or different multiple front end applications to consume your API. So, you're going to have to more often than not, your one API would be supporting multiple front end based applications at your at your customers like applications. So you're definitely going to have to understand how, like, why they're using your product and how they are going to execute your APIs. So this is probably the first place to start with, understanding your consumers. The other important thing that I could think of is consolidation of your information versus granularity. So, in the previous example I talked about, there can be a possibility that, let's say, if there are 4 or 5 different workflow steps, we could collect all the information at one shot and have the different backend applications trigger those like functionalities in the backend. That is one way of thinking about it. Another possibility is you could have break that down into 5 different APIs, right? So consolidation of API versus granularity. When we break that down, this is going to be five different independent calls. We are probably adding, or we are probably allowing for a lot of these things to happen in parallel instead of waiting for one complete network round trip time. So
Hmm.
this is probably another factor that you can think about. Are you going to consolidate all your information into a single, like API interface? Are you going to break that down? Are you going to support different operations? Probably that's another important thing that will make sure your customers are, with limited clicks or with limited inputs, they're able to provide the information that is required for the API to be successful, to function, right? Um, Another important thing I need to think of is the error codes. So, from an UI standpoint, let's say an error message, a descriptive error message on a customer understandable error message would probably, like give them a clear indication of what's the challenge. Let's say
Hmm.
if they key in a wrong input, pop-up can show them like what the issue is and they can correct it. When
Yeah.
it comes to an API, the entire round trip is going to have to happen for this, let's say for the consuming application to get the error messages or to understand what has went wrong. So having proper error codes and descriptions for them that are easy for the consuming applications to code from their side. So let's say you have 10 different error codes and 10 different error scenarios. Defining proper error codes and making it easy for your customers to code from their side to understand these error codes is another important thing. Maybe, yeah, again, extending on what I was just talking about, right? From a UI standpoint, let's say today, if you key in a wrong information, for instance, if in date of birth field, if you go in and key in some alphanumeric values, you could restrict that on the UI perspective, or you could throw an error message saying, hey, just enter a valid date or something like that. But when it comes to an API, the API would receive the information and only then you'd be able to figure out if it's a valid input or not. So having like we'll definitely have to define a proper input validation layer where at one shot you capture all the error scenarios and you throw all of these error messages back to the consuming application. That
Hmm.
way, we are avoiding situations like like you send out of the five input values, maybe the first one had an error, and then maybe you return an error message back, and then you validate the second and third. That should
Yeah.
not be the scenario, right? You will have to probably consolidate, evaluate all the error scenarios at one shot, and provide all that information at one shot to the consumer. So I think I've touched upon most of the most of the possibilities with respect to building a great user experience. Maybe one last thing. I think performance is probably the most important aspect. Just like how your UI will have to be responsive, UI will have to provide a response within within milliseconds or whatever it is, right? The
Hmm.
same thing applies for APIs, especially when even for APIs that deal with large volumes of data being transferred. We'll definitely have to make sure that the performance and the network round trip time is like optimum and
Okay.
acceptable from a customer perspective. I
Okay.
think this would contribute primarily to the customer satisfaction. You cannot build an API that takes hours and hours to deliver data, and in the midst of all this, if a process fails and if we do not have any mechanism to provide a proper error response, that is definitely like bad user experience. So I
Absolutely.
think I've
Yeah.
touched upon a few or five aspects there. Yeah.
Oh, that's a lot to unpack actually. So I mean, just to summarize, so you mentioned about understanding your customers, right? So that's the key point. It's the same for normal other product managers as well. It applies here as well in API product management. Then you spoke about consolidation versus
Absolutely.
granularity, and then you mentioned about the error codes, right? That's very important. People need to understand where we went wrong, what's why is it not working, so that your developers also understand, right, what needs to change, or why it is failing, right, so that they make appropriate changes, so that the right error messages are shown to your clients or customers, right, in the front end. And then you also spoke about the
Absolutely.
validation part, and of course performance and the network stuff which you mentioned. Okay, great points. Thank you so much, Fakir. That was really useful. So for the product managers who are listening right now, right? So what are the key skills they need to have, or they need to work on to be successful in API product management?
So, for people to be successful from an API product management perspective, maybe I would say let's start with. I think I touched upon this a few minutes back, right? We talked about the way we execute an API being similar to the SQL queries and all of that.
Yeah.
So, again, a basic understanding of databases and database operations would
Mm.
help someone to relate and understand how APIs work in general. Because API operations are more or less on the same line. So
Yeah.
in database, you probably create a table, you maybe update, delete, and things like that, right? These are some basic operations. The
Mm.
same way, API operations like get, post, put, and all of that have different like perform similar operations. So maybe having a basic understanding of databases and the DB operations could definitely be one of the skills that would be required. But beyond everything, I would say the most important thing is the mindset shift, right? Like, we are definitely the differences that we talked about from an UI UX, the user experience standpoint, is something that anybody will have to understand and have a good grasp of to be very successful on the world of APIs. So, yeah, I think I've summarized
Mm.
this. I mean, to summarize, one is definitely like some basic understanding of DB operations and relating that with the API operations. Probably this
Mm.
is some skill that will really be helpful.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I just talked about is like, um, yeah, visualizing how your like how your API is going to work, or
Mm.
what functionality your API is supporting, is definitely like something that's not straightforward, something that you would need to develop that skill. And to
Okay.
do that, I think, as I talked before, maybe getting your hands dirty working with some of the existing open APIs will give you a perspective of how like APIs work.
Got it. Got it. Oh, yeah, makes sense. Completely makes sense. Yeah, you also touched upon something like Swagger in the beginning, right? So, are there any tools or frameworks you recommend?
See, from a product management standpoint, yes, I think there like every thing that we generally talk about from a UI based product application
Mm.
definitely applies for APIs as well, right? Uh, in terms of tools, I would say, yeah, you are right. So Postman and Swagger are definitely the tools that you would have to use to execute your API as a product manager. When you do like user acceptance testing, or maybe when you try to play around with your APIs, you definitely need to have an understanding of these tools. But trust me, these tools are like, you definitely don't have to write lines of code here. It is just about building some basic uh, basic requests with some like apply like adhering to a standard protocol. But it's
Mm.
mostly straightforward, right? Like whatever operations you are just going to have to make, you can set all of that up in Postman. Swagger generally has most of these like with like specific text boxes or things like that, which is much more easier as well in general.
Okay.
Maybe in talking about frameworks and tools, maybe I think a basic understanding of frameworks like RESTful API, Google's gRPC, and others. These are basically your API interfaces.
Mm.
So having an understanding of these, and also your API gateways, like I think Layer 7 and Kong and others, uh, which are actually gatekeepers. You can build in some, like some authentication mechanisms, and for like and then routing mechanisms from the gateways to your applications. So maybe these are some of the frameworks and tools that you can get an understanding of. These are definitely going to help you when you coordinate with your teams to build API related products.
Yeah, got it, got it. Cool, cool, cool. So let's talk about some challenges also. So you painted a very rosy picture so far about API product management. What kind of challenges do you face as an API product management? What are the biggest hurdles you have faced personally?
Well, okay. I think the very fact that your APIs are being consumed by another application is a boon and a bane, right?
Mm.
Boon in the sense you don't have to worry about the look and feel and things like that, but then you will have to think about it from a you'll definitely have to think about it from a application perspective, right? Or from a
Mm.
developer who's actually building the application perspective. So. It like the definitely the challenges are around understanding how your developers are going to build applications that could talk to your APIs. So uh, I think getting first-hand feedback from your customers would also involve getting feedback from their technical stakeholders, from the developers. So, like there are times when there are specific feedbacks that come in from a technical standpoint. So you might have to understand how it fits in with your broader picture and take decisions around how to go about them. So maybe that is one thing that I could generally think of. Um, Another thing is, I think the idea of the way we think about MVPs, and then we build incrementally on top of it. From an API standpoint, we'll definitely have to ensure that the newer versions that we build, or the newer increments that we talk about, are backward compatible, meaning
Mm.
without any major changes, your customers who are using your existing version should not be impacted in the first place. And then when they decide, and then you will have to probably work with them to migrate them over to the newer versions.
Yeah.
So and the concept of A/B testing and others that you do with your UI applications,
Yeah.
that kind of experimentation is not easy to do with APIs, right? So I think this is a bit of a challenge in itself. But then you will have to, uh, let's say, once you build an API and you have a set of consumers using, customers using them today, every decision that you take, you will also have to ensure you sound out those decisions with your stakeholders. Make sure, I mean, your customers are okay with these changes as well. So that definitely adds a layer of complexity. Maybe the
Mhm.
other thing that I could think of is, as we talked about, moving on to like incrementally adding,
New
versions.
changes. Yeah.
Yeah, new changes. And in the API world, we call them as new versions of your APIs, right? So
Okay.
let's say at some point in time, your older version of your APIs are not going to be financially viable to support, given you have built in a lot of additional features in your latest version. So deprecating end of life APIs, making sure that your customers don't throw tantrums at that. Make sure you kind of make them understand the benefits of moving over to the newer versions of the API, and then deprecating your older versions of the API is another challenge that you could generally think about.
Okay, cool, cool. So, deprecating of API, that sounds pretty interesting. How do you handle such scenarios? Because I mean, in the other side of product management, we know that there is a product that is reaching its end of life phase, and then we see how we actually gradually move it out, right? So, similarly, do you have a similar phase? How do you face? How do you take that up?
So I think the best way to do it is uh, giving your customers like a clear picture of the benefits of moving over to the newer version, right?
Hmm.
So as you rightly said, closing out end of life products, and or maybe even building a new UI. I think you're just going to replace a new UI with your older UI with a new UI. Like
Yeah.
boom, on day two, your user is going to see a new UI. They're going to be okay with working with that. But when it comes to APIs, yeah, you definitely have to make sure your customers are kept in the loop here in the first place,
Hmm.
right? And
Okay.
we generally work with an idea of giving them a heads up, some a few months or a few weeks back. The reason why I say this is we are talking about your customers going back and modifying their applications, right? So let's say you have some new input and output parameters. Your customers will have to make some code changes at their end to accommodate
Yeah.
these. So more often than not, when you have customers who are very used to working with a certain application,
Hmm.
they're going to have to invest some cost into building or modifying the application to suit our new versions, right? So when it comes to deprecating APIs, we'll definitely have to make the newer versions enticing, or appealing for customers to move. But then communicating that and making sure you keep the customers in loop and communicate this information much further upfront is gonna help you in like overcoming a lot of these challenges. And the other thing is, from a technical standpoint, if you're if switching over from one version to another is gonna involve minimal changes from customer side, it is gonna make it easier for them. So you'll definitely have to work through this. But maybe these are some of the thoughts that just come to my mind when I think about deprecating end of life APIs.
Got it, got it. So you slightly touched upon the financial aspect in the beginning in one of the questions. We've talked a lot about technical and the UX side of APIs, but what about the business impact? How do you How do APIs drive revenue, Fakir?
So APIs generally drive revenue from a pay-per-use model, right? So let's say the number of requests that hit your API and the number of responses your API serves, you would mostly bill based on that. So the biggest advantage of all this is your API brings in the flexibility of not having to invest heavily on designing and building out UIs, right? So your applications, your functionalities are going to directly be met. You don't have to invest heavily on defining like appealing UI that the customers would have to come out and work with. So that part of investment is something that generally APIs save. At the same time, you're going to be able to extend this to multiple customers. So definitely you can serve more customers with greater flexibility when it comes to APIs.
Yeah,
So pay per use model is beneficial both for your customers and for us, right? So only based upon the number of like based on their usage, they're going to have to bear the cost and all of that. The other thing that I could think of is like in terms of for instance, in terms of cloud hosted applications and all of that. So understanding how effectively we could manage cost, right, is probably another factor. I think this is again applicable to any product, right? So as much as we would expect a product to bring in revenue, we'd also have to think about how to efficiently serve your customers with minimal servers or minimal impact. So I think with cloud and containerization, I think a lot of these are extendable on the fly. Like you could
yeah.
scale up and scale down as required, right? So but having a clear picture of the costs in play to serve your like serve a particular request will definitely help you clearly define the revenue versus the cost and take like informed decisions.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating. Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, awesome. So API PMs aren't just thinking about tech. So you're saying that they are also thinking about business models, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. They are primarily thinking about the business models, and the success of any product is definitely in terms of making it financially viable for the firm,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, definitely yes, definitely yes.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so this has been an insightful discussion with you, Fakir. But before we go, I would like to come back to my previous question. I mean, it's related to my previous question. I would like to understand one piece of advice you would give to product managers who are looking to break into this API product management.
Fantastic. So, I'd probably start saying a statement that's slightly different from the general perception, right? So, I don't think API product management should be called out as a separate, stream of product management or whatever it is. How people think about it, right? Because so today I'm not working with API products. I've been working with API products for about 3-4 years with Transunion initially. The way we look at the platform, the way we look at our API capabilities have also evolved and changed over the years. So, taking a step back, I believe every product manager would go into a phase where they would definitely be building out API products,
Mhm.
either just as standalone applications or in tandem, working in tandem with your other UI based applications and all of that.
Yeah,
So, but for anybody who is getting started with APIs, I think I'll reinstate some of the points that I mentioned before, right? So the first thing definitely is uh, like get yourselves the complete background of the basic functionalities of APIs. Definitely, as I mentioned, there are a lot of content in the learning platforms today for to enrich your knowledge on APIs and all of that. Get your hands dirty, go for trying out the existing APIs, understand how APIs work, the different methods, how to invoke, and all of that. And I would also say this as a product manager, not just for APIs, but in any like any practice for that matter, right? Having an understanding of having a basic understanding of technology, like let's say a high level understanding of the steps that your developers are going to take to build a product. Or I think the other important thing that you might probably have to know is like get an understanding of how your applications are hosted. We talked about the cost or optimizing the cost perspective, right? So
yeah.
definitely getting an understanding of how where your applications are hosted. Is it on cloud? How are we using cloud today? So these are some basic technical aspects that will really help a product manager, level up and um, make sure that they add a lot of value in the conversations they have with the tech stakeholders. We always have a vision and strategy, we have our metrics defined, but like to communicate this effectively to your development stakeholders and your architects, you'll definitely have to it is never wrong for any product manager to build in some additional understanding about these aspects that I just touched upon.
Yeah.
I probably that is maybe one key takeaway that I would probably give when I moved into API product management in the first place, right? When I moved into Transunion in the very beginning, I've had people tell me that okay, APIs could be technical and all of that, but trust me, having this basic understanding of the ones that I just talked about really helped me have meaningful conversations with my development teams, and we've been able to deliver APIs that delivered value to our customers.
Awesome, awesome. Great advice, Fakir. It was a pleasure talking to you today, and really great insights from the conversation we had. I absolutely loved having this discussion with you. I hope you come back again on another topic sometime, someday. All right, cool. Thank you so much for joining us today, Fakir.
Thank you, Suraj. No, thanks a lot again for having me here. It was a pleasure interacting with you, talking about API product management as well as in general. Yeah, I'll be happy to come back and have more conversation. This is enriching for me as well. Thinking through all these and reminiscing all the challenges that he had faced on the API world, for instance. So, thank you
Yeah.
for giving me this opportunity. Appreciate all of it.
I am 100% sure that this conversation would be really helpful for lots of budding product managers, especially people who are in most organizations. You might have also encountered that people are just pushed to a product management role, just pushed to an API product management role, who have this kind of fear that okay, this is a technical role. How do I thrive in this environment? Am I really set up for success here? So those kind of myths have been busted today. So thank you so much for enlightening us with all your knowledge, whatever you have gained, all the experience you have shared. I'm so grateful to have you in this podcast today. Thank you so much, Fakir. So until we see each other in some other episode, thank you so much. All right, you have a good one.
Thanks a lot,
Cheers.
Suraj. Thank you.
See you.